Does AI run the risk of complete human extinction, and should you be concerned about it? I'm going to discuss my take on this and hopefully give you some actionable things to think about and do to potentially mitigate what is becoming a widespread narrative right now in the industry. But before I do, I just would like to encourage you, if you like the content I create, I would encourage you to subscribe and follow my content as I continue living life human-centered focus at the intersection of people, business, and technology. So today this video actually is a bit of off the cuff because as I was going through some things today, I came across this article from the New York Times that was talking about the fact that AI poses legitimate risk for extinction. And this is tied to some of the things that we've seen recently where senior leaders and a lot of these big tech companies are starting to sign petitions saying, hey, we need to put a hold on this. This is getting out of here. And my goal with this is not to perpetuate any sort of fear mongering because the reality is the train has left the station, but more to think, how much should I be concerned about it? And what can I do practically speaking? Because I think this is one of the things that many people are going to have to wrestle with, whether you like it or not. Like many technological advancements we've seen through human history, we're just going to have to navigate it forward. And does it, my one answer to, do I agree that it does pose the risk of extinction? I think that risk is real. Do I think that's where it's going to go? I don't know about that, but I think in many cases that's up to us and what we choose to do about it. And I don't think that decision is held by a select group of people, which is why I'm trying to make as much as I can to help everyone get involved in this conversation. So for those of you who may not be as familiar with AI and what's going on, I do want to level set a little bit what we're actually talking about here, because AI isn't new, even though it seems like it with all the stuff going on in the media right now. I mean, AI has been around for a long time. And generically speaking, AI is anything that a computer can do or a machine can do that in some way simulates or replicates something a human could do. So when you start thinking about it like that, that's as diverse as this thing is automating a simple task or a thing on my computer or a search algorithm type of thing to what we're seeing in some of the latest of generative AI and advanced AI with some of this stuff that's happening now. So it's a wide spectrum. So if you're wondering like why suddenly now are we concerned about extinction, I think it's important to see that in 2023 specifically, the adoption of advanced AI and the progress that generative AI has made has really kind of exposed society to the realities of what we're really dealing with. I think in many regards, unless you ran in tech circles before and you really were nerding out in these areas, you weren't necessarily as familiar with it, even though it was starting to creep into your everyday life, whether you realized it or not. I mean, Google's been around forever and using AI to advance the accuracy of its searches and things like that. So this isn't new, but I think now suddenly people are seeing it behave more human-like than they ever have before, which has people starting to go, well, wait a minute. And the progress has been exponential, even in terms of if you look at, we'll just use Chat GPT as an example. If you even just look at the different generations of it, now we're on 4, how quickly that's advanced and the complexity and the effectiveness and what it can actually start to do. And now how other tools are tapping into that and they're applying it in different ways. I think people are starting to see, whoa, this thing is moving at a pace that has the potential to go out of control before we really understand what's happening. Now, if you read the article, and again, if you want to look it up, you can check it out. The New York Times has this AI poses risk of extinction. I will warn you, it doesn't go into, well, not warn you, but I will caution you, you're not going to get all the details of what is. In fact, it hits on some of the risks at a very high level and primarily focuses on, what people are saying about it and actually more of that versus the risk. The real risks that it hits on are around the misinformation that now can happen, and some of the other things around that, and whether it's going to threaten jobs and the livelihood of people, which, having spent some time around this, they are real. I'm not going to say, oh, there's no truth in this. And I don't want to dismiss these things completely because there is legitimacy to the fact that there are serious risks associated with this stuff if left unchecked. And I would add that piece to the end of it of there are serious risks if we just leave it unchecked and just say, who cares about this? Train's left the station. You already said that, Christopher. So, let's just see how this plays out and not do anything about it. And I'm sure we'll be fine. I think that would be a very foolish move. And again, when the godfather of AI and some of these leaders who were around in the genesis of this stuff are starting to quit their jobs to speak publicly about it, you have to start taking it seriously. So what I would say to folks is, if you're seeing this and thinking, this is just a bunch of propaganda, stuff I don't need to concern myself with, I would say that is not the case. And you've seen, I made other content before, so feel free to go back through my library to look at some of those where I talk about some of these things in a little bit more depth. But if you're not taking it seriously at all, I would say that's a foolish move. I think you should be taking it seriously and paying attention to what's going on without getting wrapped up in the fear of things that are well outside of your control. If you're concerned about, well, what do I do about OpenAI and its protocols for whether it's training more advanced generations of its own algorithms, then okay, chances are, if you're watching this, you probably have little to no control or involvement in that. So freaking out about that isn't going to do you a whole lot of good because you have little to no control over that. Being concerned about this and understanding what it means and how to look out for it and what to watch for, because in many regards, the consumer, and this is true of a lot of things, the consumer is what drives whether this goes this direction. So where we spend our money, where we invest our time, what we do with these things is going to determine, well, is it legitimately going to lead to our extinction? Oh, well, I don't know. Are we going to choose to make purchase decisions and demand things from these tech companies and ask for it to do things for us that are ultimately going to lead it down a path of that? Possibly, and we have that choice. I've made a video about, will it disrupt your job? Do you have to run the risk of losing your job over this? Perhaps, but that's not new, right? Has human society gone extinct because we don't have lamplighters or switchboard operators anymore? No. Does advanced AI have the capability to displace a lot more jobs than that? It does. And for a workforce that's ill-equipped to know how to transition and navigate that, and how do they focus on what new things they should be doing instead of what technology can be doing, yeah, that is a legitimate risk. Are there privacy concerns around what it can do, what it can find, how it can then process that information? Yes. As you think about some of the risks of misinformation, I mean, over the last few years, we've seen the destruction of misinformation and how something that isn't even true but looks true can cause absolute chaos in society. And so now, as you look at what advanced AI can do in terms of creating things that are practically indistinguishable between truth and fake, is the risk that people will legitimately do weaponized types of things with this? Absolutely. And I think this is where we need to start looking at this and saying, okay, so what do we do about that? Because some of these things are going to happen. Whether it leads to our extinction or not, in many regards, is in our control. And the same is true of things like misinformation. Misinformation is only as powerful as you allow it to be. If you take the time to critically process things that you see and do digger deeping and challenge your own assumptions and things like that with it, well, then it has no power because you're able to distinguish it. A good example, let me give you an example of this that I shared in a recent panel. So I have a tool that actually has created an AI version of my voice. There are video tools that technically could create an AI version of myself. So in theory, someone could take they could have AI generate a script, a series of language around this. They could then take that AI generated script. They could use it to create an AI generated voice of mine that sounds very similar, to many indistinguishable from me. They could then use an AI generated video tool to craft an AI visual that looks exactly like me, sounds exactly like me, says words that may sound somewhat similar to us. And Could someone do that and well, probably not with me because I don't carry all that much influence. So any fake content that you would put out by Christopher Lynn's probably not going to do a whole lot of damage. But fake content by someone in a significant position of power, of influence, of things like that, you can quickly imagine what kind of destruction that could cause. But an example of where I say, are there ways that we can mitigate this? I think of an example. I watch a lot of stuff with my kids, and I was watching a thing recently about how folks distinguish between fake and real dollar bills when they're detecting fake currency. And the way they do it is they do it by studying the real thing. And when you understand the real thing, you can quickly distinguish between fake and real. And I think that's one of the areas that, as we look at this risk and we start talking, and I'll talk about this more later, of what do we do? I think there's an opportunity as we look at mitigating this. We have to become more intimately familiar with what AI is and how it works, how it looks, how it sounds, how it thinks. Because the more we study what it is, and the more we study people and understand who people are, the more we're going to be able to quickly and easily distinguish the two so that we're able to think critically about it and still make critical decisions and not be disillusioned by what could otherwise be catastrophically distracting in many regards. So there's some real ethical discussions around this. And I think some of the things that we're seeing right now around the risk of, is extinction possible? I think some of the risks we're seeing around this have to do with how fast is too fast, and where are we going to slow things down? Now, in human history, we haven't had a great track record of saying, you know what, why don't we take some time to think through the implications of these things? Let's think through, let's look around some corners before we just dive forward. And I think that's what we're seeing right now in the news and things like that, is people who are very familiar with this are starting to say, not let's do away with this, but this is moving at an accelerated pace that is uncontrollable. And if we don't take some time and be intentional about doing something about it, it's going to get out of hand to a point where the risk of extinction literally just continues to go up and up and up and up and up. And by slowing down, we may have the possibility of saying, hey, why don't we mitigate these risks and things like that? So the risks, they're real. At the same time, though, I mentioned this in a short that I recently created. Before you go digging a bunker in your backyard, going off the grid and disconnecting from all technology types of things and saying, you know what, I'm just going to avoid this whole thing in hopes of surviving the apocalypse, there are some fantastic benefits that are coming with this advanced technology. I mean, if you look at what it can do for efficiency, and I say this with caution, specifically with this one, I think we have to be careful with efficiency, going back to how fast is too fast. When is efficiency something that actually ends up detracting from things? But the ability, there's a lot of time spent. So going back to, job displacement, there is a lot. You look at employee engagement data, employees are largely disengaged because they are spending massive amounts of time on things that are not adding value, that are sucking their souls out of them. And AI has the ability to take some of that off their plate, actually allow them to spend their time doing more human activities type of thing. We've also got the gray tsunami coming, where there are going to be less people to fill the jobs that we have, than even exist. And so some of this by default is going to have to rely on AI to even be able to keep pace. It's also creating new jobs related to these things. So while just like things I mentioned in the past of jobs that sunset, similar things will happen in the future, and it will create new things. There will be new fertile ground that spring things up that did not exist before. So this idea that AI is going to come and take everyone's lunch and we're all just going to be sitting there to our machine overlords wondering what we're going to do as it relegates how much we get and all this. I mean, to me, that's still stuff of science fiction. Could we let it get there? I think so. But there is a lot of good that can come with this. I just even look at some of the advancements in my field specifically. So to give some examples of that, as we look at the complexity of learning and human development, There is so much nuance and complexity when it comes to developing and growing people. It's been an impossible task, which is largely why in our industry we've had to cast the widest net out and hope that we catch most people, which unfortunately leaves a lot of people drowning. Whether you want to look at neurodiversity, some of the challenges that people have just with cognitive development, the way their brains are wired, there's a lot of different things, accessibility for things that some people just didn't have access to, or because of their circumstance, it made it very difficult to access. AI is now opening up the possibilities of this. So even in my field, as I look at the way we develop people, the access that we can give to people, there's the ability for us to raise the tide for everyone. And I'm legitimately very excited about some of the things. I've worked in healthcare for a long time. And even years ago, some of the ways that we were using AI to detect diseases that we just flat out couldn't before, to diagnose diseases, to come up with cures for things. There are some really incredible things around healthcare. You look at the environment and the way that AI can find patterns and identify new creative solutions that we hadn't considered at a speed and scale where we're actually trying to say, whoa, we're way down the path. How do we even try and catch up? AI actually has the ability to allow us to catch up with some of these problems we've created for ourselves that have gotten so out of hand, we legitimately don't even know how to back them up. And AI can actually contribute to moving that forward. So when you start looking at that, it's fantastic. I think one of the things I mentioned in a, well, let me, so needless to say, with all of that, hopefully at this point, if you're in either camp of completely dismissing these risks as serious and thinking it's no big deal, it is. You're seeing a good example of this. We're seeing AI creep into even all the tools that we have. And many people are just blindly accepting them as part of the use of their day-to-day life without really thinking like, what is this doing for me? Is this actually making me think more critically? Is this helping me engage better with other people? Is it doing these kinds of things? Or is it actually making me dumber? Is it taking away things that I really should take responsibility for and I'm relegating and delegating it off to a machine type of thing? I mean, these are some things. So if you're in the camp of, it's no big deal, I would encourage you to raise your threat level a little bit and say, hang on, I should be more intentional about this. I should be looking for some of these things where I'm seeing automations or new tools come out that are talking about AI. Maybe ask some follow-up questions around what is it doing. Raise that threat level, ask follow-up questions, get into discussions and seek out content around this objectively. If you're in the other camp of the world is ending, I'm just going to go Amish and have nothing to do with this technological front and hope that I come out on the other side, I think that's a foolish mistake as well. Because the reality is, whether you realize it or not, you're already using AI tools, and AI tools are making decisions about you. Even the fact you may have found this video may largely be the result of AI. So the idea that unless you truly are just going to go completely off the grid, but even that, you can't get away from it because the way society and organizations and governmental institutions are going to be making decisions and doing things moving forward, it's going to be embedded into all of that. So there's really no way to escape it. But I don't think that should lead you to hide out and run from it, because going back to it, there is a real balance to what we can do with some of this stuff. Now, I think here is where I want to spend some time on this. In first of all, one, what does it really mean to have a human-centered approach to this? And I want to give some practical examples to this for folks so that you can start to act on how this works. Because if you go back to, so let's take a look at what, so first of all, what do I mean when I say human-centered thinking as it relates to AI? This is actually thinking about the people first. And I think that is, when you're thinking of the center, we're actually putting people at the center of this and saying, all right, not at the expense of people, but to the benefit of people. How are we thinking about the use of AI? And I think that's really where we're going to see the biggest lifts. When I go, even going back to the examples of great things that I've seen, where I'm starting to see really positive things, humans are at the center of this. We're asking the question, how can we use this technology to make people's lives better? And how is it going to make them distinguishably more human and improve them versus, and again, I want to be careful with this because you can say, well, convenience. We're trying to make their lives more convenient. Well, convenience comes at a cost. And I think this is where we have to think critically about, and we have to have groups with diverse perspectives in the room because a lot of times, and we can see this through human history, oftentimes when we think about the convenience or the betterment of a specific group of people, we're not thinking about, right, but is that betterment, is that convenience at this group at the expense of someone else? And there may be people who listen to this and think, well, isn't it always the case? Aren't we playing a zero sum game? And the answer to that is no. As I look at some of the decisions I make in organizations now around how we're thinking about AI. So, as an example, I was working with an organization once recently. We were looking at how can we use AI to improve managers and ultimately employee experience. So at the center of this really are the employees and the managers and our target audience. But again, there were some real risks we had to consider because at first, some of the discussions, and this is just a practical example of this, or at least practical in my world, was, hey, with generative AI now, we can actually have it help managers because one of the things we consistently hear from managers, and this is a conversation, one of the things we consistently hear from managers is they don't have time to do their performance reviews. So they don't have time to write these things up. They're very time intensive. The system is very bureaucratic and it's very difficult. And so it's taking them away from their jobs and putting them on, something else. And so the thought was, well, couldn't we use advanced AI to write and construct these performance reviews and automate a lot of the process for managers so that they're not burdened with this task, which, okay, going back to this human-centered thinking, if the only human we're putting at the center of it is the manager versus humankind as a whole, that may sound like a really, really great idea. Well, we'll put people at the center of this, and the person we care about is the manager. And the manager says they don't have enough time to do this activity. They don't have enough time to write these things up, and the system takes them too long. So let's blindly throw AI at it. It can automate all of the system options. It can craft and narrate this with a few basic prompts. The manager can have a beautifully crafted performance review, and then the system can automatically notify the direct report of this thing, give them that feedback, offer them the opportunity to add any input, and then push it back to the manager. Bada bing, bada bang. We've cleaned up our system in the name of efficiency. We've made the manager's life easier. Hopefully, as I'm walking you through this thought process that we ended up walking back from and deconstructing, you're quickly seeing how decisions like this can go south very quickly. Because at the end of the day, if you think about this, if we were only looking at the manager, and this is why I think diverse audiences of people talking about this, not a select group making decisions around it, is really important. Because had we gotten a bunch of managers in the room and that been the only audience we talked to, I don't know that there would have been a whole lot of managers that would have said, I don't think this is a good idea. I think many would have said, this sounds fantastic. You made my life easier. Thank you for making performance management wonderful for us. On the flip side, though, I think very quickly we would have heard from the employees. And when we looked at the data, one of the biggest issues with employees was my managers are not having conversations with me. I don't get enough connection points with my manager to get the kind of feedback, the development feedback that I need, the constructive criticism, the encouragement, the positive feedback. I don't really know what my manager's vision is and how that's all coming together. We could have ignored that and the solution would have sounded fantastic. But what we challenged was, let's think about people as a whole and who are the different audiences. And then we started doing that. We quickly saw that this idea of convenience and automation for the sake of automation in the name of what could mask itself as human-centered thinking. Well, we thought about the manager. That's human-centered, right? The manager is a human. We thought about them. That's not what we're talking about when we think about human-centered thinking. Human-centered thinking is about thinking about all the people involved and what their role and what the potential trade-offs are for all of these folks. And once we started doing that, it very quickly became clear that Well, actually, we brought in some other perspectives as well. But very quickly, if you just listen to what I just described, you should quickly see that as an employee, that convenient human centered experience that could have been designed with AI would be a terrible employee experience because now we've removed or at least created the environment to completely remove the manager from the very thing that people so desperately were craving for from their manager in the name of preserving the manager. Add to that, and here's where we brought another lens into this, was for senior leaders. One of the biggest things we're looking at is when we look at leadership problems, we're trying to identify where are the trends, what are some of the things we can consistently see. And what this originally proposed process would have done is said, well, wait a minute now. Now, what we used to look at was whether managers were completing their performance reviews and the quality and efficacy of those performance reviews and things like that. And well, now AI would mask that, creating further breakage in the system of even being able to detect where leadership gaps existed to be able to do something about it. So when we're thinking about human-centered thinking, it's not just about picking a human or an audience and saying, all right, what do we do for this individual? That I think is where we run the risk big time of going wrong. And this can be applied in anything. I have 7 kids under the age of 12. As we start thinking about what human-centered design with, I mean, they're not doing a whole lot of stuff with AI at this point, quite frankly. But as I look at them as their dad and leader in this, and I start looking at some of even the tools that they use and some of the apps that are now adding AI to it, and we're starting to think about, okay, is this in the benefit of just our kid? Because as a parent, what are the implications of this on me as a parent if this AI thing is starting to, I know Snapchat's one that's added some things where it creates a friend for someone that they can have. Sounds good on the surface. Great. Now somebody has a connection. Maybe they don't have a whole lot of friends. This AI can fill that gap. But what are the implications of potential friends that they may have whose relationship is now going to be compared against an AI bot that gives you exactly what you want? Well, no relationship is about just getting what you want. So, are we creating an environment where people are being conditioned to see relationships as something where I just get what I want out of that relationship? As a parent, is this doing something where it's different, like separating the reign of control between my child and me because this AI is now playing a parental role in their life type of a thing? Now, again, and are they? Not necessarily. I think there's some opportunities we need to consider. But I think this is when we start thinking about human centered. We have to think about the diversity of human experience and the number of different people involved in that human experience, not just one distinct audience. And I think that's going to be the really important part when we think about what it means to be human centered. And that's something that you can be thinking about as you look at some of these things, is start to think of, and here's the thing, you can use AI to help you understand some of those things. If you don't know what some of these other audiences may be thinking or what some of the implications are, you can actually use AI to help you and bounce ideas off. I do this regularly when I'm thinking about the implications of something, to ask, how might this land with this? Or what might be the unintended consequences of making a decision to this group of people? And it can quickly give input on some of those things. But ultimately, my point with this is when we bring a human centered line of thought to AI, it's about thinking about all the people involved in the system, not just one distinct one. As soon as we start thinking about one distinct one, that's where we start playing the zero sum game, and we're going to make catastrophic changes or decisions that are going to have long term consequences and implications on folks along the way. And so I think that is a really important thing when it comes to human centered thinking. The other thing that I would add to this is, as you think about any sort of AI implication, I would encourage people to always think about what is the human that will be in the loop in part of that. Is it completely removing humans from the loop? And the reason I say that's a critical component is, well, I think there are parts of process flows and activities where we can say we can remove the need for humans here. Anytime we start getting to a point where we're thinking about AI as eliminating the need for humans, period, that's where it's concerning. And you can dig into some of this data if you'd like, or read some of these things. But consistently, what we see is humans plus machines together consistently perform better than either one by themselves. You can go back, I can't remember what the experiment they ran with this back in the early days. But if you paired, they were doing this with chess, and this was just continually demonstrated. It was that when you put the two together, there really were benefits when you paired them. And so sometimes when I'm in conversation, not sometimes, regularly when I'm in conversations as people are working through, here's where we're thinking about adding AI, or here's an area where we're considering using AI to do this. One of the things that I'm always asking is, where does the human sit in that process? Where are the intentional break points and decision points that we're going to build into the system to ensure that there is still a person involved in that process, in that activity, and not just to mitigate risks, but also because the data tells us you are going to get a superior product if you put the two together. So that combination of thinking about the holistic group, the diversity of the human experience, and making sure you're representing that whole group and doing the time, taking the time to slow down and think about who are all the people involved in this so that we can make sure we accurately represent them all. And then how are we actually designing with intention where the human component needs to be? Where are those intentional breakpoints and decision points and reflection points that only a human can be responsible for? And what are we doing to prepare people to understand the process so that they know the implications of the decisions that they're making? So I think when you think about this, taking a human-centered approach to AI is one of the greatest ways we can mitigate the risk of whether extinction is too extreme, but even just the damage that we have. So I want to conclude with some of this stuff. What are some practical things you can do? I know I've talked about, a handful of different things along the way in terms of, okay, what is all this and what really can I do? And there may be different areas depending on your space. So first of all, one, I'm extremely active on social media. So I would just offer this out to anybody that if you have questions or you just want to bounce some ideas off, you feel free to reach out to me. This is something that I spend a lot of time trying to help people understand, and it is far too complex to create universal statements. So first of all, one of the first things you can do is if you think there's a universal answer to anything you're doing, just stop right there. Even the article that I shared of, extinction. Is there a universal solution to that? Is extinction an oversimplification of where this could go? It absolutely is. And I think we need to be okay with the fact that there is a lot of complexity and we are going to need to spend time and effort and energy into thinking about this. And if anything, this is one of the things that I think is being lost on society right now, which is why I think AI is such a big threat to us, to be quite honest, in terms of why is this such a big threat? I think in many regards, technology has made us lazy in a lot of different ways. And we don't convenience, going back to something I said earlier, we have prioritized convenience and speed over everything else instead of saying, you know what, sometimes taking the time to think thoroughly, take the time to think things through, ask questions, run some different situations, and do this stuff, we're in too big of a hurry. And so, one of the first things that you can do is slow down. Anything you're doing, whether you're a parent, whether you're at work, whether you're in a senior leadership position making decisions, whether you're in a tech company, whether you're one of the couple hundred people on this list of things making decisions, slow down. And I think that's exactly what this whole movement to slow things down is all about. Can we slow down before we make decisions? So if you're in a position where you're looking at something and going, I'm trying to decide whether I should use AI or not, don't think AI, think specific. So there's another step to it, is actually break down, what are you actually thinking about? And is this within your realm of control? So if you're presented with an opportunity to decide whether you're going to engage with AI or not, be specific about where that is And what are the implications of what it may or may not do? And also, what are you giving up in order to get that? Going back to the speed and convenience thing, a lot of us are pursuing that, not thinking about, but what are we actually giving up for that speed and convenience? And so taking the time to actually think about these things. You see, just practical example, Snapchat. You see, Snapchat has added a new AI tool. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't delete the app. Don't force your kids to delete it off their phones immediately. Take the time to understand what it is, understand what it can do, understand what kind of controls and mitigation plans you can put in place, understand how it actually works, understand what different kinds of things it can do and what it can't do, and how that information is being used. Take the time to actually dig into that, and not just reading some headlines because you saw an article on Facebook that said this is stealing your children's souls, deleted it immediately. Read it, understand what it's saying, take the time to process it critically, look for things on the other side of it, and actually start to understand, okay, but where are people seeing benefits in this? And what are they seeing benefits for? So that you can start to weigh things. This is really distinctively what makes us human, is the ability to do these things. And I think this is one of the things where you hear about advanced general intelligence, AGI, the next step in this. And there's this push that machines are going to be able to make distinctions better and faster and more accurately than humans. And I would challenge that. I think the contextual information and understanding the complexity of human experience, are there things where it maybe can make decisions faster and better than we can? Yes. As it relates to people, I would say absolutely not. Even as people, we aren't great at making decisions. So to have a machine try and do that, machines learn from us. We aren't very good at it. What do you think something that's moving at a million miles an hour, that's trained on what we do, that's already broken, right? It's just going to do this faster. So I think as you think about these things, taking the time to slow down, break it down, think through who are the different people involved in these decisions and what are the different trade-offs around this. But I think it's really about isolating what are those specific situations. If you're unsure about it, reach out to folks who may know more. I offered before, if you have questions, approach it on a situation by situation basis though. Don't don't try and decide, am I going to engage with AI or not? You already are. So I think it's more a matter of, hey, maybe do an inventory. Here's something else that I have actually encouraged a lot of people to do recently, is do an inventory of where AI is actually intersecting your life and where you see it starting to intersect. And if you're not familiar with that, that tells me that you may need to familiarize yourself with what AI is doing and where it is being embedded in different things, so that you can start to do an inventory of what this looks like. It's the same thing you would do if you were trying to get your finances in order. You can't know whether you're spending money in the right places or not if you haven't taken the time to see how and where you're spending your money. You're not going to know whether you're using AI properly unless you actually do an inventory of what AI you're using and how it's being used and what the benefits are, what the downfalls are, and bring diverse people into that conversation. Don't make it in a silo, or don't let AI make the decisions for you. You're actually going to have to spend more time on the human activities that I think many of us have distanced ourselves from, especially over these past few years. And we're going to need to learn how to lean into those and actually do that. I'm going to create another video here soon talking about the leadership crisis of AI. I think leadership is an area of opportunity that AI is going to potentially cause tremendous threats to. But that's for another day. The other thing that I would just encourage everyone to do with this is, as we've moved into the digital age where we have access to so many different people, so many people out there doing so many different things, it's easy to forget what's really in your realm of control, and being able to figure out what things should I be thinking about and investing my time and energy in, and what things, if I invest my time and energy in, really no matter how much time and energy I pour into it, I really have no control over it anyway. And being able to balance that, because as you read articles like that New York Times article, sure, there's the tendency to want to go, well, I just need to try and figure this out so I can decide what to do, when really much of it is outside your control. But these things I've described up to this point are within your control. So invest your time in those things instead. And I think the other thing that I would say more than ever, we have fundamentally forgotten what it means to be in relationship with other people. We've failed to recognize that we've lost that ability to distinguish people and really understand the complexity of the relationships we have, and learn how to build those relationships and what it means to have and maintain a relationship. And that's going to be really critical in the AI phase. And I think that's the biggest weapon that we can build as we prepare for what's coming for us, is to actually deepen that human connection that we have with others. So that, going back to the example I gave earlier, if somebody were to type a script, make an AI generated voice, and make a video and put it out, it might fool people who don't know me. But people who actually know me, who have spent time getting to know me, who actually understand human relationships and take the time to get to know people that they like and don't like, and actually break through the surface of the veneer that we often see with people, nobody would be fooled by that video. And I did it as an example. I created a totally AI video and sent it to some of my friends and asked what they thought. And the ones who knew me were like, "That's not you. Like, how did you do that?" type of a thing, because they knew who I was. And I think that's going to be a really important component. As AI continues to rise, the need for us to become distinctly more human will also continue to rise. And I think that's something that we have a choice, and we can do that. And we have more control over this than we realize. While you may feel like, well, this AI is just coming at us and we have no control, you absolutely do. You choose with your actions, you choose with your words, you choose with your money. And so, where you're taking those actions, where you're spending that money, what you're doing with it, is all informing where these things are going. And so, I would just encourage everybody to take some time to slow down, to stop, to ask questions, to get to know what's going on in this space, to do an inventory of where you're at, do an inventory of what's in your control, and be realistic about it, and take things on an individual basis. Don't think that all AI is out to get you. It's not. In fact, I think in the next few years, there's going to be certain things we're going to look back on and go, I don't know how we lived without this before, the advancements that it's brought. And I also think in the next few years, there are going to be some things that we look back on and go, had we known this, we never would have moved forward. An analogy that I used with a group recently is, I just think of the nuclear fission. You know, we've used it to kill and destroy. We've used it to create energy. We've used it to create toxic waste. I mean, its power is incredible, but what we choose to do with it will ultimately decide whether we actually are on the verge of human extinction or not. And I'm optimistic. I think I've seen us wake up over the past few years to how important human connection and relationship is, and what it really means to be distinctly human. I hope we continue down that path. And while the temptation for AI to just continue to make our life easier, make it more convenient, take things away from us in the name of convenience, not realizing that we're actually giving up a lot of the control and the autonomy and the human capability that we have, I think the power's in your hands. And so, as you look at this and you look at where it's going, I would just encourage you to educate yourself and just do some of the things that I encourage, and reach out. If you have questions, if you're trying to figure these things out, let me know. If you have use cases and you're like, I'm in over my head, I have no idea what this looks like, well, message me in the chat, ask questions, message me on LinkedIn, and I would be happy to help folks as they continue moving through this. So with this, hopefully this has given you some encouragement on where things go. If you're on the, oh my word, the world is ending. Hopefully, if you thought this was no big deal, this has made you think a little more, and will actually lead you to go take some actions. And on both ends, I hope instead of it just being great content that you consume that makes you think, I hope it makes you take action, because that's the only way we're going to make a change. All right. Have a great one.